Hello and welcome to IGE Talks. IGE Talks exists as a forum for public discussion on topics that are relevant at local and global levels. IGE Talks is hosted here at the Institute for Global Education, a peace and justice organization located in Grand Rapids, Michigan. My name is John Longchamps, and I'm a new co-host for the program alongside Renee Karachi here. And Renee's going to jump in and introduce us to today's topic.
Today's topic, we're going to be talking about Emma Watson's speech she gave at the UN on gender equality. She talked about as an ambassador of on the campaign called He for She, and that is a partnership between men and women that work together to fight for gender equality. We're going to show you a small clip of the speech, and here it is.
How can we affect change in the world when only half of it is invited or feel welcome to participate in the conversation? Men, I would like to take this opportunity to extend your formal invitation. Gender equality is your issue too. Because to date, I've seen my father's role as a parent being valued less by society, despite my needing his presence as a child as much as my mother's. I've seen young men suffering from mental illness, unable to ask for help, for fear it would make them less of a man or less of a man. In fact, in the UK, suicide is the biggest killer of men between 20 to 49, eclipsing road accidents, cancer, and coronary heart disease. I've seen men made fragile and insecure by a distorted sense of what constitutes male success. Men don't have the benefits of equality either. We don't often talk about men being imprisoned by gender stereotypes, but I can see that they are, and that when they are free, things will change for women as a natural consequence. If men don't have to be aggressive in order to be accepted, women won't feel compelled to be submissive. If men don't have to control, women won't have to be controlled. Both men and women should feel free to be sensitive. Both men and women should feel free to be strong. It is time that we all perceive gender on a spectrum instead of two sets of opposing ideals.
The campaign for He for She, the goal in that campaign is to bring together 1 billion men and boys by July 2015 to grow towards sustainable and transformative gender equality. Today in our production of Growing Equal, we're going to be talking about gender discrimination that's implied in our society and globally, gender inequality that we see, and the consequences of bringing genders together on an equal basis. And starting on my left, we're going to introduce everybody around the room, starting right here.
My name's Kate Shockey. I'm a local artist and I'm an IGE volunteer.
My name is Kim McKeon, and I am also a volunteer at IGE.
I'm Judy Bookman from the volunteer as well.
I'm Lena Singh, and I'm a volunteer as well.
Okay, Mike Franz, IGE board. I'm a retired community college professor who has some things to say about this issue based upon my teaching experiences.
My name is Chester Lowe. I'm board member with IGE as well as producer of the show here.
Great. We've made our way around the circle, and now it's back to Renee and I. And tagging on to what Renee mentioned about the meaning of He for She, this mobilization of 1 billion boys and men toward closing the gaps and reaching gender equality globally, what's the meaning of it, and what are the implications of achieving this landmark goal set to be completed in July 2015? It's moving rapidly. It's gaining tons of momentum on social media channels, and it's really just exploding. And as you saw in the previous clip, Emma Watson coming on as Goodwill Ambassador for the initiative is facing it towards the public and creating a lot of exposure. So as the global conversation on gender equality continues to disseminate, and as we continue to consider what growing equal means, and as the gaps are closed between the genders, gaps in equal pay, gaps in equal education, what are some of the things that we need to consider? And my first entry into the circle here, the circle of folks gathered together to discuss this topic, it stems from an individual level. So looking at nature versus nurture, are the ways that young people develop into gender and sex roles really informed more so by nature or more so by nurture? And what are the implications that we see, and what are the opportunities that we see as we observe and have a part in creating a real opportunity for the young people, for the young kids that are in our communities today? What do we see? What have we learned from the past? And what kind of opportunities do we have to extend this knowledge of nature versus nurture and create gender equality?
I might lead on that because I'm easily the eldest person in the room.
I'm going to be down close behind you.
I was raised in the 1940s, and I have to admit that my mother always raised me to respect women. She taught me how to walk on the outside, for example, when we were walking down the street together, because women were supposed to be protected. Now, in some ways, that was the traditional women's role. The man was to lead, and the women were to protect. And she was a strong-minded individual. She always spoke her piece when it was her turn, and my dad always supported her in that way. So we had a lot of discussions around the family table, and everybody was equal. Everybody was able to join in just like we are now. And so I was kind of raised in an environment where women were highly valued, but they also sensed that they had a different place from men. So, that was the 1940s and 50s. Somebody want to pick it up from there? Go ahead.
Yeah, mine's kind of the next step down, because I was born in 1948, and my mother was very much, I was on a farm board, and I had 4 brothers, but at the same time, she pushed me to be at the fair and speak ahead of a group of people and stuff. So there was that kind of both, and she knew when she was a maid in the wealthy house, when she had her first job, and she, as a mother and a wife, she went in to go into the neighboring, and she couldn't get a job wrapping paper for the Christmas, because she never had a high school diploma. So she knew firsthand of what that was like. So I think she showed it to me that I can be out and speak up and be involved. And she herself did some things in many ways in the schools and so on. It was a model for me that
That's
you stand up and you do things.
My mother, during the war, I was born in 43, and in 1944 and 45, she worked for Borden Company, dairy company in Grand Rapids. She had a high school education, but all the chemists were gone, and she hadn't had high school chemistry. They hired her to do the formulating to make cottage cheese. And the milk would come in, they'd measure the amount of fat, and she put in the right amount of chemical to turn it into cottage cheese. And then the war ended, and 46, 47, the chemists started to come back, okay, and men came back and took her job, as was expected. There was nothing unusual about that, I guess. You know, but her boss thought, you know, gee, you were the best one we ever had. We're going to really miss you, you know. And I thought that's outstanding. You know, she had that time when we were very young. I was only 4 or 5 years old, where she was doing an important part of feeding America.
Well, when you say there's nothing unusual about that, is that something, is Renee or John prepared to say that's something that shouldn't happen? Just because it happened all the time, does that mean it should have?
Well, I think what's
The
interesting.
women were replaced as soon as they were no longer
That's
needed?
what happened, okay? That's a sociological fact.
Right. My question is that something that shouldn't happen these days?
It happened in World War I. Women were replaced by men after they went into the factories. It happened in World War II. But women did step up. And I take this from an essay I used to teach at the community college called The Natural Superiority of Women by Ashley Montague. And he argued that women were naturally superior to men. And he used, one of his arguments was what happened in the Great Wars, the First World War and the Second World War. And I'm bringing this up now because my mother was part of some of the facts of what he was talking about at that time. But it happened, okay? And women did step up, you know. And, you know,
Rosie the Riveter.
The Riveter, Rosie, yeah.
Yeah, that's
Iconic.
That's what I was thinking
They
too.
did.
Iconic.
And they proved themselves, and a lot of them were kept. You know, the unions had women in them as they built through the 30s and 40s and so forth. But sociologically speaking, during the Depression, the man was the breadwinner, and the women were supposed to step back unless there were jobs that they were supposed to be good at, like sewing and, you know, food service, that kind of thing.
But that
So,
time
yeah.
was how they were, the women were showed, hey, we need to go out and be there, and it was in the newspapers and stuff, and how after it was over, oh no, you can't dress like this and like that. So that's what we have to deal with as women, you know, that especially men, but not as much as women, don't you think?
Women were much
As
more
women?
strident during that period of time for moral causes, you know, prohibition, you know, getting the vote, you know, they were fighting hard for those things, but they did not fight hard for jobs and to maintain any of those economic gains that they had, which is surprising to me, but that's the way it was. You know, women still accepted the idea that they were second to men and men should lead. And I was going to ask you too, when you brought up this UN thing, because I haven't quite experienced it yet, how does this compare to the Million Man March on Washington that was prepared where, help me out.
Farrakhan. Louis
Farrakhan,
Fred
okay.
Lewis.
He
Yeah, Louis
told
Farrakhan.
women to step back and let your men lead. This is the way to solve the, you know, the problem of the inequality of the sexes. And that was his
Wasn't that
answer.
because the, you know, this twist, so women felt like they had to do that? We stepped down
That was the
now.
only deal they were given. Yeah, step back or there's no deal. There's no relationship between no proper relationship.
Well, that was a million man. I think the UN was talking about 1 billion men.
Yeah.
And for that matter, the commitment they're supposed to take, I'm a little vague. How does that commitment take shape? What do they actually do?
So building on, I'll defer back to your original question there, Chuck, and the building on the momentum that just transpired between the two, speaking towards what has happened in the past. Speaking from a perspective that stems from the mid-century of the 20th century, and the stepping up to the plate, if you will, of women and the ability of women to step into what was societally categorized as a man's role, that of a chemist. And the original question that you had, Chuck, how does that transpose onto today's reality? Women stepping into roles that are guided and mostly prescribed to men, and it makes me think of Well, it's a matter of global economics. Countries that don't utilize their women in the workforce are putting themselves at an economic disadvantage, and clearly exhibited by Mike's point about women stepping up to the plate in World War II into roles that are largely perceived as roles that are to be held by men. There's no question of the ability of women, in my mind, from a person, in mid-20s in this contemporary age. I in my own mind have absolutely no differentiation in my own mental schema of the difference between the ability of men and the ability of women. So for me, looking at it, taking it from the local level that Judy and Mike have exhibited about what their local reality was in the 40s to the contemporary reality globally, I think it is a matter of global economics, and countries who aren't creating roles for women to ascend into and to work in are putting themselves at a disadvantage economically in the global scheme of things.
I think there are statistics that when women have more education, the whole family economically does better. And that, so you hear of all these cultures that are trying to keep women illiterate and in the house, and really they're working against progress and against economic development.
Yeah, there may be some that can speak on this subject better than I that are here even, but I remember listening to a reality radio, WPR public broadcast, of a woman who I think taught school in Pakistan. And women there were not allowed to go to school in the first place, but she had a school there that she operated, and she was teaching women a trade, how to knit and weave and dye things and so forth. And this was traditionally a male occupation there, and so she was being resisted very strongly by the local populations. But she developed a system where women, each one could teach one. She would take a group of girls aside, she'd show them how to make a certain color dye, and then they would go teach others. And she'd take them through all these steps involved in this. And at the end of it, they had the total capacity not only to do their trade, but they could teach it to others by using the same method.
That's really interesting, Mike.
Yeah.
And to now build on Chuck's second question of what does mobilizing 1 billion men and boys actually mean, and what's the action component to it? There's an example that comes to mind, and it builds off what you've just mentioned now, in terms of the trades and the crafts. It brings to mind the work of Mohammed Yunus being done with the Grameen Bank in Bangladesh. He started the Grameen Bank, and he's been recognized by the UN. He's a Nobel Peace Prize winner. But the Grameen Bank is an instrumental component of achieving gender equality in rural Bangladesh. And actually, that bank gives out microloans for people to use to create businesses for themselves and to create a sustained income. And 97% of the microloans that they give, they're very small, equivalent of $35. But 97% of these microloans are going to women, and Grameen Bank does this intentionally because they've noticed that the loans given to women are utilized for purposes that develop the family unit and sustain the income in a way that's more focused on others. And they've experienced that when the loans are given out to men, it just gets drained. The money just evaporates. So looking at the work of Mohammed Yunus and the microloans that his Grameen Bank has given to women throughout the developing world is really inspirational, and I think acts as a benchmark, if you will, for how other men and boys around the world can take the current reality and look to an inspirational figure for inspiration to start thinking about ways that we can extend these kinds of platforms and opportunities to the other the other sex.
Yeah. And then what's great about bringing men and boys together for gender equality is understanding that this is not just a woman's issue. This affects all of us, and like we're talking about now, this helps sustainably, this helps economically. And what do you think of this? I heard somebody say one time, someone I knew personally, that the economy would be so much better if women just stayed at home. And this is somebody in his late 20s, early 30s told me this a couple years ago. If women just stayed at home and life was just like how it was in the 60s. And so, I know. And so then that would help out the economy. Men would go to work, women would stay at home, raise kids, and there'd be less divorce, not less divorces, but I guess what he was going back on saying was that the single family idea that is and divorce is a major problem in our society, and that's what's drained the economy. I haven't really thought about that since that time, but what you're saying now about helping the economy and helping how the world fits like that, with just helping out each other like that, I can see now that really doesn't make any sense at all. But I don't know how someone would be so discriminatory.
When
like
I was
that.
in
Sure.
elementary school, my mother stayed home, and she was involved with things like the League of Women Voters and other groups, but she got bored. So when I was in late elementary, she went and she got a master's in library science and became a librarian. And she was a school librarian, and then she got an executive job with the Cuyahoga County Library Board. And actually ended up, though they did split up later, making more than my father.
And this was in which era did this
In the
transpire?
60s.
In the 60s.
How did your father feel about that? Did he resent it?
Yeah, so they did cause
Was
problems.
it embarrassing to him?
I'm not sure if it was embarrassing. It was also, she developed her own set of friends who weren't necessarily the same as his friends. That a lot of the people she knew a lot of gays, lesbians, and people in the library field. And my father wasn't always comfortable around them, but my mother always was. She had no problems.
Well, speaking of comfort, we were also wondering, what are some personal perceptions you all have or stigmas that you feel about gender equality that maybe makes you feel like you want certain things do you want to stay the same and not change? What are you comfortable with as far as gender inequality or equality goes? Are there, would any of you, as women, would you date a man that's more feminine? Could you be married to a woman that makes more money? I guess, what's your temperature on that? What's your standard on that?
Well, is this kind of a developing commitment where it's up to people in the grassroots to figure out what their commitments are going to be? I mean, we can, excuse me, we can't all be, what is that, Gameen Bank?
Grameen. And Grameen is actually the Bangla word for village. So these village banks.
Well, obviously, the UN and Emma Watson are not asking us all to start micro banks, but they're asking us to use our imagination.
I think that men and women still don't know how to communicate very well. I think Emma even brought that up in her speech when she said, I don't like to call myself a feminist because a feminist has, a bad rep.
Yeah.
And she says, and a lot of times there's all this men bashing. Well, and she even said in her speech, that has to stop.
Yeah.
So Renee, what do you think about that? I mean, I think men and women still really don't know how to communicate.
Yeah, I really think that it's really that men are, it's like they don't want to really vocalize how they feel. It's like too much of that just emasculates them. 'Cause communication, like when we communicate, we're more empathetic. I mean, just by how the female brain works and how the male brain work, and they're more emotionally. Females are more emotionally driven. As for men, they don't really want to go there. Like they're afraid to express fully how they feel about something or what they think about something sometimes. And and a lot of times that stigma comes in where they don't understand emotionally how the female feels about something, and then he says one thing, she says another thing, and then that causes some stigma. I've seen that a lot.
I know part of it is biology, but also the way boys and girls are culturated. That boys are taught much more to play sports where there's an antagonist, where you're against each other, you're not cooperating. And girls tend to be steered to things that are much more cooperative. It is changing somewhat now with more girls' sports, and with hopefully with boys learning how to cook and school. When I was in junior high, boys took mechanical drawing and they took shop, and girls took home ec. And you couldn't take, but now I think both have to take both. That it's not. A lot
took
of schools.
home ec, probably in 1953 or 4.
When I was in
Central High School, home ec.
school in Cleveland, boys weren't allowed to. And even when I was in high school, which was in the late 70s, there was one girl in my class who she ended up going to Carnegie Tech, and she wanted to be an engineer. She had to get special permission to be allowed to take mechanical drawing.
Wow.
Because girls didn't take mechanical drawing.
Right, yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
We had printing, we had mechanical drawing, we had
Car
the
mechanics.
manual arts, where
Yeah.
there was shop. And, but yeah, and health was something we all took.
Mhm.
I'm talking about 7th grade, 8th grade,
But that was, they were segregated.
No,
In
they
health.
weren't. In fact, I remember one of our 7th grade teachers telling the girls not to carry their textbooks like this, and one of the boys said, "Why?" And she says, "Well, they might hurt themselves." And he said, "Hurt what?" And the girls were all red-faced, and the guys were all.
Oh, when I was in high school, it was.
We were in the same classroom. We knew what was going on. Come
Well,
on.
when I was in high school, in Cleveland, it was part of gym class, health, and it was definitely segregated sex-wise.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, I had home ec too, but there were a lot of giggles. It was treated as a joke.
I guess my point is that I think if men and women knew how to communicate better, I think that there might be a little more of a balance. Because I think sometimes we take things that one another say, even in the workforce, too personally. Because we're not communicating right. You're right, men sometimes don't understand women because a lot of times women want to be heard more on a feeling basis, but at the same time, I think men. I read a book years ago after having a relationship with somebody that relationship was a long-term relationship that had its moments, and I read this book, and it was to understand. It was called "Men Are from Mars, Women Are from Venus."
And that's where I'm coming from too. Is like also.
And it was interesting too, from coming from a woman's perspective. The Mars was the men, and listening to where men came from, because many times when we sit and we talk to a man, they think they need to rescue us, and they don't. We want them to listen to us.
Or they follow the mentality that she's just being a girl and he doesn't want to understand. A lot of times I've seen this and to me also, like, women have been accused of reading into something when really our mindset works towards how we feel about something and just being more in depth about a topic that we talk about with them. And so yeah, from a relationships perspective, I understand this, and I think that if men weren't afraid of their own feelings, and not all of them, but most, I think especially amongst the younger males, if they were afraid of their own feelings and openly discussing certain things with women, or just anything with women, that he could take something or learn something from females, and then she could probably as well. I think that males and females complement each other, even though there's a lot of denial of that in
Yes.
this world. They complement each other. You know, he's able to express something that he can't, but it's because of her help, or she's able to think of something differently because of his help. And again, they complement each other. And if we were able to allow that to happen to us, especially on the male side, then I think communication would be a lot better.
But also, there aren't just men and women. There's a big continuum of different, and some people fit different places on the continuum. They're not all football players, hunters versus nurturers, and that there are people who are in between or have some characteristics that are considered more appropriate for the other sex.
Sure, Kate. And I think that's really where the technical definitions of sex and gender really come into play. Sex being purely physiological, and gender being comprised of societal constructs that, as you mentioned, do exist on a spectrum and do create silos, if you will, or a mode of categorization. In my mind, I almost question the value of these categories. Is there a point to continuing the use of the societal construct of gender? Is there so much of a spectrum that there's so much infinite potential for combinations of attributes within an individual that it almost makes it a moot system? Is it doing us justice as a human race to keep perpetuating gender constructs societally? And then I go to Kim's thoughts on communication, which is such a critical factor, and communication between men and women. I'd like to even bring that to a place of communication between men and men, or communication between women and women, which I can't speak on, but I can speak about communication between men and men. And my experience is that I've personally been frustrated with having articulated myself and then almost being, I would say, chastised for doing so. So I think that's a real thing that exists. I do think that there's a growing number of men who are able to express themselves emotionally, and I don't know that broad stroke generalizations are the intent of certainly anyone here, and the communicative ability, if that's even a word, communicative, the ability of men to communicate and women to communicate, I think exists on an individual level, and certainly looking at the system, the whole symbiotic system of the sexes, men and women, there certainly is a natural symbiosis there, and emergent from that natural symbiosis, there are patterns and similarities that stem from groups. But I wonder if the value and the importance of the individual almost transcends gender categories. And what's the value of gender?
Well, it does exist, and there are certain ways where most men tend to be one way, and most, like girls, mature faster than boys. That's a scientific fact. Though
So
nobody
I would
actually,
say
brains
that's
don't really
sex
grow
related.
until their brains are developed until people are in their 20s or 30s.
But is that what makes it equality? Is that what will make it equal? Like, what I'm saying is, if girls do mature faster than men and boys, whatever, what equality does that bring? You know, like there has to be something that men mature more than women do that we may not know about, you know? And I don't know, I feel like the people I've talked to about gender equality, most of the women have spoke about wages, and that
Yeah, well, that's more of an adult thing. I'm talking about
Yeah.
young kids.
But there's other ways young people
Yep.
can evaluate. They'll vote for somebody for an office, you know, in their school or counselor or something. And, you know, there's women and both men or boys and girls running for these offices. And so, you know, there's ways in which, you know, homecoming queen and king and the values attached with that and kind of thing. Homecoming queen is also so important. And the king is just whoever the captain of the football team or something, you know. I mean, that's
Sure. One, building off of Lena's point about the natural and physiological development between the sexes. Certainly, girls are maturing in certain ways quicker than boys. Perhaps there are factors that have gone unexplored or underexplored in terms of the development of young people and children. Perhaps there are areas that boys develop proclivities within sooner than girls, and that again leads me to the question of sex versus gender. Certainly, we can all agree that there are men and women, boys and girls. Is it as simple as looking at men and women, boys and girls, and humanizing the word, the understanding of gender? And I wonder if this humanization of understanding the word gender calls for its elimination. Because is it as simple as there are boys and girls, men and women, and those boys and girls, men and women have a wide array of attributes individually? What's the value of having the construct of gender?
One thing that Montague pointed out in his essay on natural superiority of women is that women have not always aspired to be equal to or better than men. And that's always been a problem with women, and a lot of times they've been taught not to aspire. But I had a class once when I vividly remember, an English 102 class, where I had 12 nursing students, candidates in there. And they would turn in the most wonderful papers you'd ever want to read. They were the most imaginative, bright, whatever, and I'd bring the papers back with A's and A pluses. And one day I asked them, "What are you doing?" "Well, we're in nursing." I said, "Oh, that's great. You're going to be nurses." I said, "You know, you could be doctors." "Oh, no, we don't want to be doctors." Now, 2 or 3 of the girls had doctors for fathers in the room, but no way did they want to become doctors. Their aspirations were I said, "Well, you'll be great nurses."
Yeah,
That
well, I
was
had
my
an
only
aunt
answer
who was a
at the time.
nurse, and she should have been a doctor, but that was back in the days when girls weren't doctors. And
Well,
that,
this
so
is-
she
yeah,
didn't have a
1980s.
choice. This was in the 40s.
Yeah, that was a transitional period there, but now it's not that uncommon, you know, to find women in a high medicine everywhere and
Renee,
excelling.
out in the workforce, what do you think? Do you think that women are more competitive with each other, or do you think men and women are more competitive?
I think, you know, so I work I've worked in the service industry for so long. I definitely think in that field, particularly, women are definitely competitive, but I think that there's more competitiveness with men and women. There's definitely like expectation of what we're gonna, like how far we will reach, and men always seem to act superior in the service industry. I mean, I can only speak from that because that's really all I've ever done as far as work goes. There's that expectation that like we're not going to be smart enough, or men kind of feel like this superiority or this like entitlement to just kind of treat us. I can sense the implied like we're second best kind of feeling there. Trying to think of how I can describe the service industry. Like, it definitely seems like it's a female's work. I mean, there's male servers too, and then there's of course a lot of female.
What kind of service industry have you worked in?
Like waitressing.
Oh.
Yeah. And there's like a stigma between kitchen staff, which is mostly always men, and front of the house staff. And because I've worked in places where they would be mad, or they would feel like there would be resentment towards us because we made more money than them, especially in bars. It's like this, and so they start having this attitude, this chauvinistic attitude of, like, you know, she's not smart enough, she's, you know, like, she's not better than me, and this antagonistic approach when they deal with conflicts that happen at work, like any workplace. And I think that definitely drives from insecurity. Insecurity is one thing, and yeah, just that feeling of feeling like inferior to the opposite sex. I've seen that a lot, because money is a big thing in this, and when you make more, they feel a lot less. Yeah.
So our capitalistic society kind of perpetuates that.
Oh yeah.
It's how you keep track. I mean, even when Romney was talking about the 47%, it was because he made more money, he worked harder and was better. And I think he made his money because the 47% worked their tails off so that he could become rich.
Here's a interesting fact or footnote on this discussion. This was an Associated Press article in the Grand Rapids Press, October 5th. Why has job growth fallen for women? Okay, this is what's going on right now. U.S. employers have added an average of 215,000 jobs a month this year, up from 194,000 in 2013. But the job growth for women has dropped more than 14% this year. Since the recession officially ended in 2009, women have taken fewer than 40% of the jobs added. At the same point in the previous three recoveries, they accounted for much bigger shares, 47% after the 2001 recession, 51%, and so on. 1982 recession, 63% jobs went to women. Men have been gaining jobs in business traditionally dominated by women, such as hotels, restaurants, financial services. Women have lost ground in manufacturing. And you know, whatever gains you've had over this period of time, that economically there seems to be a major setback right now for women. I can't explain it, but
Well, you know, there's a no real adjustment in any of these statistics for women as caregivers,
Yeah.
as parents.
Yeah. Well,
So that's an interesting point.
Hmm.
Actually, in some of my research that I've looked into, the total workload of women being taken into account when we consider the realities of the different sexes. What's the reality of men? What's the reality of women? Well, by and large, the reality of women seems to be taking care of our elderly and children. So this total workload notion being factored in and compounded with paid work, unpaid care work that women are taking into account.
And I think we need to get to the point where men are not looked down on when they do child care, when they do cooking, when they do shopping, when they take over parts of what's generally considered women's work. I think it needs to, because at the present time, most women, if you have a job, then you also do all of the other things, or you're in charge of them. And so when men do a little bit of work, they feel very proud of themselves, even though their wives may be doing 3 times as much work.
You know what's really interesting, listening to what you just said, Kate, it makes me think about urbanization, and in terms of global sustainable development, the movement and migration of people from rural areas of the world into cities, and the implications, the positive implications for people moving into cities. Thinking about the day-to-day activities that happen in cities, I think really starts to influence and redefine what's acceptable in gender roles, if you will. So I think what's acceptable for men to do and what's acceptable for women to do in terms of the perception at large. And I think that perception ranges vastly amongst all of us inhabiting this globe. So that leads me to a place of considering how urbanization factors into all of this, and ultimately, what will the discussion be in 50 years as people continue to move into cities, and how does that factor in?
I think we're getting towards a tipping point where there's going to be more people living in cities than not living in cities. And that cities seem to be getting bigger and drawing more people, which means there's a different way they have to function than they used to. I know now a lot of people your age are, rather than moving to the suburbs, they're actually moving into the city.
Yes.
And even when they have kids, in my neighborhood, there's one family who moved, they've got 2 school-age kids, and they moved from the suburbs to East Hills because they wanted the city experience and they wanted their kids to have a city experience.
Oh, absolutely. And parlaying that into Kim's earlier point of the amount of work that women are doing versus the amount of work, I wonder if in an urban city context, if that starts to become more of a shared effort amongst the sexes, a shared effort in caring for our elderly, a shared effort in caring for our children.
It does make a difference. Like, I worked at home for a lot of years, and my husband was a bicycle mechanic. He did most of the grocery shopping because he passed 3 or 4 grocery stores on his way home, and he'd bring the groceries home on his bike.
Okay,
and
yes.
He also liked to cook, so he did a lot of the cook. So we both did cooking.
Oh, I can relate to that too.
One thing I want to ask,
Epicurean.
I know I've said very little, if hardly anything. I'm going to ask, according to what Lena was asking a little earlier, we haven't even touched on to it, and I think it's a very important point, and that's about the fact that women get less than men, and as far as wages. Now, where does that originate? Why? And how is that possibly not? Why women kind of like drop back or decrease on the workforce?
I made a statement a while back that women in unions have been treated more or less equally to men. And I remember when we formed our first union, when I was a teacher in 1965, discussions with the MEA and so forth came up that should the high school teachers, who were mostly men, be paid the same as the women teachers who were mostly in the elementary area. And we were talking about, shouldn't men get more money for teaching in high school? And after all, if women wanted more money, they could come and teach in high
Plus
school.
men have
too.
families.
Right.
They
well,
have to support.
Well, the women had families too.
But that
they
wasn't-
weren't necessarily the first breadwinner. They came down with an interesting decision. They said, no, it's going to be the same across the board. Women and men will be paid the same, they'll be valued the same, and they'll be treated the same. And all, the 37, 40 years or so that I taught, I felt that was the right decision. And we always valued the women. They were the department heads and they did things in the college and so forth. We didn't say, well, she's a woman, she can't do that, or the men should get more, or
Well, that's
whatever.
education, Mike.
It just wasn't. That was an education, okay?
Yeah.
But
But
But it
actually-
wasn't necessarily there in all fields, I
Yeah.
But I'm
understand.
going to ask, as far as that's concerned, are you familiar with, someone enlightened me the other evening that the president of GM, that's General Motors, when she first stepped in,
Mary Barra.
what was her name?
Mary Barra.
Mary Barra. When she first stepped in, she was not going to be given more, but less than what the
Oh, sure.
former
Yeah.
president who stepped out was.
Well, that's
No,
not
I
in a
wanna-
union, so.
Big
Well,
pardon?
that was management, but.
But it's also with GM going through the bankruptcy and things, there were some reorganizations on that.
But if there
But
were,
it is.
but if it was a man stepping in there, I don't think that would have happened.
Mhm.
I don't know if either one of you are familiar with that fact.
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at all.
Well, okay, so you know Susan B. Anthony, you guys?
Yes.
know her?
Yes.
Mhm.
She's the lady who let, for women's rights, allowed women's.
Equal
women-
suffrage movement.
Yep.
Oh.
And the right to vote.
And the right to vote.
Yeah, that's equal suffrage.
Oh, well, I believe that, like, she did the right thing, you know? Like, if we women can't vote, how are we gonna change, you know? Like, how are they gonna know? How are they gonna hear us? So like this equal gender thing is not just women, it's men and women. And like you said, how are we supposed to like define gender when there's also like the same-sex marriage thing going on, you know? And then besides that, with the equal wages thing, it's like, how are you supposed to even do that when you have all these people who have experience versus seniority, which like every year certifications get renewed, you know? And sometimes there's like a barrier, there's so many barriers right now. It's like, how do you like connect all this and equalize it? Well, there's no one speaking up, you know? Like, I give props to Susan B. Anthony because she was like, women need to vote. Well, we're doing our thing, but is it really working? Like right now in the House, like Michelle Obama, she made it so we can have equal wages, right? Susan B. Anthony made it happen in the 1850s. Wow. And now it's the 21st century, and we're talking about equal wages?
Yeah, well, women didn't get to vote, what was it, 19-something?
20?
1920.
1920, yeah.
Was when suffrage came, so that
Oh my God.
Susan B. Anthony didn't actually live to see it. She was a proponent, but it didn't happen until after she was gone.
But the power of women didn't really go into effect until the same era or the same decade as when minorities were getting the rights to vote,
Yeah.
as well as the power in the House. And that was in the 60s.
You know, as a 20th century event, women becoming able to participate in the democratic process in the United States, that milestone, I see a 21st century milestone building on that into representation of women in the government, in political facets. So beyond participating in democracy, becoming instrumental within the government itself, and having more women in positions of political power. I was listening to a Guardian podcast actually earlier today, and there was a woman from the World Bank, and there were two folks from the Guardian who spoke on the sort of economic implications of gender equality, and they were speaking mostly at a global level. They touched on a political representation of women being instrumental in achieving equality, and that comes to mind as a milestone that we have to achieve. And building on Lena's point, taking action. What's the action component? Well, I really think it is women in seats of political power. And that Guardian podcast, the representative from the World Bank confirmed that the trends show and the information shows that countries with more women in seats of political power end up with legislation and outcomes that benefits the whole much more so than the countries with an underrepresentation of women politically.
And part of it is that women have to start getting involved in the grassroots, but they have to stay in and they have to start running for office.
Mm-hmm.
And I know for a long time in Congress, the first women who were in Congress were there because their husbands died.
Right.
And
That's still done today.
It's still done today, and it's but there are starting to be more women who did it on their own and didn't just replace their husbands.
Most of you watched through some of the Roosevelt series, the Ken Burns thing on public television. The one that really got me was the one where Eleanor Roosevelt all of a sudden stepped forward when her husband was in bad health and declining. And then he died. Truman did not hesitate to appoint her to be in charge of the American delegation that would help form the United Nations. And she had her hands full. She had this conservative from Grand Rapids, who was an isolationist from way back, and a whole bunch of things that she had to overcome. And she did it. She played these men, I'll tell you, and she played the world leaders, all men. She was the only woman And she got it. She got the UN and the Charter and the Declaration of Human Rights and right on down the line, you know. And that was Eleanor Roosevelt. And today, we wouldn't even dream of putting a woman on a peace discussion committee. I mean, that's men sit down. Men make war and men sit around and make peace. But who would ever think about that, you know? And we've lost all that momentum that we could have gained, you know, from that. Because we didn't, you know, learn our history or whatever.
Respect our history.
Golda Meir was on, she was the Prime Minister of Israel in the late 60s. She was on Meet the Press once, and she says, well, I have a secret plan to end wars for all time. And all the men, you know, said, what? And she says, well, it's simple. She says, women should teach their children when young, or boys especially, to hate war. And we'd have no more wars.
I remember Anna Quinlan, who was a very well-known op-ed columnist for the New York Times, and a couple of years ago wrote a book. And she had 2 sons, and then she later had a surprise daughter. But she said that one of the hardest things she had in parenting was trying to raise feminist sons.
It's interesting you should mention the word feminist in looking through the great body of research that Renee amassed and then shared with me. I've really learned a lot in moving towards this program here, and through some of my own research as well. The understanding that the word feminist is not only about females, but rather it's about the equal treatment of men and women. And it leads me to this question of, how do we humanize this conversation? How do we humanize this notion? Is some of the vernacular polarizing folks, and how do we best move forward toward achieving true equality?
I think part of it is realizing that everyone is an individual and people have different skills. I used to do taxes for artists, writers, musicians, other weird people, and it wasn't a gender thing, but it was different people think differently. Some people, you ask them, how far did you drive? You want the mileage. A lot of people will tell you, well, it was so many miles round trip. If you get a writer, they'll say, well, I went here and I stopped and I saw this person, and then I went here, and they give you a story. And because their mind doesn't, and my cousin cannot list expenses in a straight line in a column. She's just, she's a wonderful person. She's very, very creative.
Mm-hmm.
But
line items, though.
Line items are not her thing.
Forte.
Do you think the environment has a lot to do with gender equality?
When I think about the natural environment and the built environment, I think there's multiple factors, and I think about how people interact with the environment and how people are a part of nature. I think a lot of the time we separate people, humans, from nature. We're part of nature, and that question brings my mind to a place of, how do we as people, as humans who are part of nature, affect it? And maybe looking at it, if we start to segment our effect on the natural environment on a sex basis, what is the effect that men have on the environment, and what is the effect that women have on the environment? And then the flip side of that question would be your original, what is the effect that the environment has on women, and what is the effect that the environment has on men?
I have to tell you a story. I was teaching, and I was in a school where I had a lot of freedom. And we would take our book and their diary, and we would go to the river. And we would just sit there, and no one could talk to each other. And I have so many kids who are doing things with environment. I had a parent say just recently, of all the things he's doing. And I think they were just out there being in the environment. Not being
Absolutely.
preached to, not telling what they should not learn about it, but just to be there with it.
Absolutely.
And these boys and girls?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think there's a great value to being still and observant and respectful in nature. I know going to zoo school, we had the same curriculum. We had a quiet spot, and we went into the woods and stayed at our quiet spot for an hour or so.
Mhm.
So, Lena, your question of the effect of the environment on men and women, I am intrigued to ponder on what the differences might be, if there are differences in the way that the connection with nature manifests within men and how it manifests within women, that connection. And also, in addition to that, the taking a look at the effect that choices that men make and choices that women make and how that affects the environment leads my mind to think about who has a greater carbon footprint, men or women. Why is that? Who contributes to more carbon output, more CO2 output, men or women? So the carbon footprint, and who has a greater ecological impact? Is the ecological impact of society at largely stemming from choices that men are making or choices that women are making?
And the answer is pretty obvious. I just heard a report today, very disturbing when you realize it, but we have lost 40% of our species in the
Yes.
last 40 years since the 1970s.
WWF,
Yeah.
World Wildlife Federation. I saw that.
It was on radio today, and I just said, wow.
I'm not sure how you can tease apart the effect of men and women have on the environment.
Yeah, well,
Statistically, I mean, what?
It's what the human beings have had on the environment, and all this is man
I will
created.
go along with you that a lot of the decisions are made by men.
Absolutely. Yeah,
But
we know that.
that doesn't mean that they have a greater or lesser effect on the environment. That just means they're making the decisions for
Well,
the
they're
women.
making the decisions about plants and about how much carbon they're putting out and what's happening with
They own the
industry.
factories, they run the factories, they push for politics that help them carbonize the world.
But how does that help us to blame the men for deciding wrong?
I think we have to understand that the men have been doing this and they haven't allowed women to help them do it better. That's the biggest problem right there. Women could assist men to run the world in a more humane way. I'm taking that right out of Ashley Montague's essay again. And men would benefit from that. We would all benefit from it if we would allow that to happen. Now, he wrote that essay in 1950, and we're a long ways away from that, but we're not much further along.
You know what's an interesting thing to consider, Mike, is the factor that peers have amongst each other. I think that it's not all too uncommon nowadays to have peers that are of different sexes. In a corporate context, if women are ascending to ranks of CEOs of these multinational companies, is there a peer pressure factor that happens where women are ascending into these positions and taking on characteristics that are conditional and attributable to that role? How might we look at corporate structures, and how might we look at global development in terms of attributes? And does looking at it in terms of individual attributes nullify some of the basis of sex per se and gender per se, but really start to encourage a particular kind of behavior or attribute? And are these behaviors and attributes really only able to be embodied by women and men, or can we start to break the mold on some of the societal constructs and all start to take on these positive attributes and from that baseline, move towards equality. So once we've all become harborers of positive attributes and positive behaviors, from that point, mobilizing boys and men, like he for she calls for, to help women achieve more critical influence in society. I wonder how much work we have to do on ourselves as a whole, as a people, and then achieve equality.
Mr. Longtime, excuse me, may I ask you a question of challenge?
Certainly.
How would you suggest or recommend we, in the situation or in this room, or even ones who may be watching, how could we, or would we, or how would you suggest that we break that mold in a healthily and constructive manner in order to move forward?
Sure. The thing that comes to mind for me is the value of variation, and I guess that's another way of saying diversity. I think the value of variation is that more variation, more varied inputs into a system increase its resiliency. So the respect factor, if we all respect what makes each other different and recognize the latent potential that it has, we can all take what makes us unique, funnel it into the system, and then we'll end up with a more resilient effort at large, and a more strength as a global people.
Think so?
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
Also in a corporate culture, the whole corporate culture has to be changed. It's not equality for a woman if she can only get ahead if she learns how to golf.
Right.
Because there's so much bonding done on golf courses outside of work.
Well, and that one might be a
And
problem.
men
for
don't
me.
always want to golf either, but.
We need to visit it sometime.
We're gonna crash the golf course.
Yeah.
All right, Renee, we're on this.
So actually, well, I do take part in a charity, I help out, I don't go, in a charity golf outing every year, and there are quite a few females who do golf. And,
Oh, yeah.
But,
Oh, yeah.
but it's, in a lot
Good
of
golfers.
places, in
Good
order.
bowlers, too.
Yeah, but in order to get ahead, do they have to join this clique of people who are doing this certain activities?
Absolutely.
And that's not diversity.
And
that's
that links to my other question, Kate. My previous question about as women ascend into these roles in corporate cultures, are they being forced to participate, and are men who are ascending into these roles being forced to participate
Sure.
into the
certain, yes.
yeah, the golf factor, I suppose, is a great. That's a great.
Or in Japan,
Working.
it's the going out to drink factor.
Sure.
For businessmen.
Make sure to pour the other one's drink
Yes.
first.
I think it may be easier to look at the family. I'm thinking the people that I know. The father is the caregiver. He brings the child to me, who I tutor, and the mom has a couple, a high job work and well known, and there's just all these models. And then I think people are seeing them and getting awards in what they're doing. And I think it's easier to start with each other here, to be doing it with each other.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And people say, oh, did you see them on IGE Talks? You know, listen to these people talking. Never thought that way. you
Yeah,
know?
I definitely think that your successes, your tries, and your failures, and I heard this from kind of a semi-famous character, Jordan Belfort, if you all know him, but he's a successful entrepreneur, and he says, your tries and your failures and your success always trace back to your beliefs. And your beliefs, and even throughout school when we learned in our history classes, what I learned in my history classes is my teacher, I had a great teacher, and he told us, prejudice starts at home. And or your discrimination, your that way of thinking starts at home. And if that was changed, and like you said, we live within ourselves and we work together, in our small families and our small relationships and communities, like then from there it builds on something greater. So I totally agree with that.
Absolutely, Renee. And adding on to that notion, it informs the approach to the subject matter of gender equality and sex equality. Humanizing the conversation by starting at the home and starting on an individual to individual basis. What are we really talking about here? We're talking about equal treatment of our sisters and moms and husbands and dads and brothers and friends.
I think another
Humanizing the conversation.
factor is a woman's control over her body and birth control and being able to plan families, and the fact that if a girl gets pregnant, she's responsible most of the time and the man is not brought into it. And there are some places that have high schools now that have classes for pregnant fathers, so that they can bring them into the family. So even if the parents don't stay together, the father is still involved with the children. But I think it's also having control of when you have kids and what intervals and how many, and not just being forced to keep getting pregnant. Or if you get pregnant out of wedlock, it's terrible. There was an interesting program on Diane Reeves this week about Margaret Sanger, and when they developed the birth control pill in the 60s. And she and I think Mary McCormick, who was in her 70s, who bankrolled the whole thing. And they kept talking about population control, because basically they thought women ought to have fun like men have fun. And have kids when they wanted to have kids. But they didn't dare say that.
What do we know about Clinton? She went to China. They had a women's international conference in China. She had written a book, It Takes a Village. And I don't recall anything that came of that, but it was such a big deal, that the fact that it happened and that she was a keynote, guest and speaker. All I heard from my right-wing friends was, "Oh, that communist." They just wrote it all off. Well, it takes a village, that she must be a communist. She went to China, didn't she? But there was no substance to me that came out of that. But women, all of a sudden, it was, as far as I know, the first time that women ever convened a worldwide meeting together on an equal basis.
Well, Hillary Clinton is definitely an interesting character. I feel like from the time I was really young and now, people have accepted her more and more and more. I remember growing up and just hearing so many negative things about her as a woman leader. And then now she was trying to run for president and she's doing so much. And I'm seeing so many things online about her and all the good that she's doing. And I feel like there's less of negating Hillary and more kind of accepting what she's doing and looking at what she's doing. And you said her visit to China was in what year was that? 1990?
Her husband was president.
Yeah.
90s.
Yeah. So I feel like every 10 years, this attitude towards gender really changes, and especially towards political figures, that changes. So maybe at the time, she wasn't really. People said a lot of things, like she was every bad name you can say about women, like she's, I don't know, bossy, abrasive. She's just trying to ruin something. A lot of that was said. I'm sure people still think that, but I'm seeing a lot of acceptance towards her. So I can see that was just an antagonistic approach. Someone just wanted to point a finger.
But on the positive side, nothing ever really came of it that I'm aware of, and I think I would have done.
Yeah.
Did they have a conference the next year or 5 years later?
No, I think there was a lot of talk about was she going to embarrass the U.S. in front of the Chinese leadership by being for gender equality.
Now that's another interesting factor,
and
is
why China?
the cultural factors that play into gender equality, and how this conversation transpires on a global cultural level. Certainly there are different views amongst global cultures on gender and sex roles.
That's true.
However, when females get more important roles, then other people have to accept them. Like when we've had, 3 female secretaries of state, and the Saudis had to accept and talk to them as equals. And other countries did, they couldn't just
And
be.
they respected Golda Meir too.
Yeah, and Golda
in
Meir.
that time. That's amazing.
And that, so when they're in positions of power, then you don't necessarily, it's up to the other party to accept it or not, but but this is our choice of who's representing us. And we're not gonna send somebody else because you don't like them.
Mhm.
So does any of this possibly boil down to religion? As far as the female and the male in society and how they
Well,
are?
religion plays a
Yes.
Huge.
huge
Can you
cultural
expand on
factor.
that?
Oh, yeah.
Talk about that.
Please expound on that.
You're a Catholic.
I grew up in
I've
the same
talked
background.
about it.
too.
I've talked.
What?
I grew up in the same kind of background too, Catholic background.
Catholic,
yeah.
yeah.
Went to the high school and everything. I mean, I don't really have anything to say about Catholics and gender inequality. I mean, I think it's no different from most areas in the U.S. But I mean, I came from a good community. I mean, I had a great sense of solidarity where I grew up, so I didn't really see. I mean, how did you feel about Catholics and gender inequality? How did that play a part in that?
Well, I mean, the church still hasn't, it's still,
It's male.
it's all male.
Patriarch.
It's very very patriarchal. I think more and more in the Catholic Church, they have women in different roles, but still not as priest or with a hierarchy. And unfortunately, the hierarchy still calls the shots
Yeah.
per se. But it's not just Catholicism. It's Christianity all around. I mean, it wasn't until recently, even in the Christian Reformed Church, women couldn't be ordained. They can now, but
And they can't in the Mormon church yet.
yeah, you see
The
the
Mormon, they did accept minorities, but they haven't accepted women.
That was like in the 70s.
But
Yeah, in the 70s.
a lot of the Protestant churches have accepted women ministers and bishops and right on up and down the hierarchy. It's just,
Mhm.
it's
A
no big
lot
deal
of it
anymore,
have-
really.
A lot
It
of the
isn't.
ones who've accepted women started out with the small neighborhood churches.
Mm.
The ones that were independent and where there would be a husband and wife and they would be co-pastors, or the woman
Yeah,
would be a
that happened.
and it took a lot longer for the more established denominations, people, the Episcopal, groups like that, to accept females.
You know what's interesting, and this is certainly a notion that resonates with this organization, Institute for Global Education, the power of the grassroots. So when I think about religion, I'm also Catholic. I don't necessarily assign much value to some of the what I would call earthbound aspects of the religion and the human-made aspects of the hierarchy. It doesn't hold much weight for me. The value, the spiritual value, I think really happens at a personal level, and thinking critically, I think, has to become a central theme as we approach this discussion. Critical thinking is a tool that we can use to achieve global enlightenment that transcends religious categories, sex categories, gender categories, and racial categories at large. I think to achieve enlightenment at a grassroots level, we can start to have people who are Catholic, who are Protestant, who are atheist. Yeah, we can have people thinking critically together and looking at the situation at hand and saying, wait a second, the women aren't allowed to be a priest. Why?
See, it even goes further back
Why?
than that, is because a lot of that is, you go back to the Bible or you go back to the Gospels, and a lot of that was written and it was translated from Arabic to Greek.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
and you know,
and all
By
Aramaic.
that.
Yep. Excuse me.
you know what's an interesting, and you have a lot of association, I believe, with this group, Kim, is the Dominican sisters. I think they are such an inspirational group of people, in that yes, they are affiliated with Catholicism, but look at the kind of things they're doing: interfaith services, offering.
Well, you should
all
go to
these-
mass there on a Sunday.
I would-
Their Sunday masses are very Vatican II.
Okay, so there's a balance happening.
No, there is a balance,
Yeah.
because they have a nun and a priest officiating. The difference is that the priest can only consecrate the host into the body of Christ.
Right.
I wonder
The sister
if
can't.
there's
But they
room in
both officiate, and they take turns doing the homily.
Okay.
Is there room in religion for a sense of humor?
There should be.
There should be.
My religion, yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
I don't see why
But-
not.
But this problem of the loss of equality, or not the loss of, they never had it. I mean, you look at the world religions and how it's practiced around the world. And women are, culturally, they're just put in the back seat. They're revered, they're honored and so forth, but, men
They're
run the show.
honored as long as they're pure
Yeah.
and follow, and
Yes.
and if they get raped, they've dishonored the family because somebody
Yeah,
had
somehow
them.
they have dishonored the family if they are raped by a man. I don't understand that. It is-
I don't either.
And may I ask
There is a pygmy
Take me to
village
Stonehenge with you.
Yeah.
somewhere in Africa, a pygmy village, and they raise their children to be totally equal.
Yeah.
There's no sexual discrimination. They have a playground that children are raised in called the Bopi, B-O-P-E. And the children go into the Bopi to play. No adults are allowed in there. And they play from age 3, until they're mature, puberty or whatever. And they learn to play together, and all their games are cooperative games. They don't compete, and they begin to share in the adult. The survival of the tribe depends upon hunting and gathering, and the women and the men both do all these activities together equally.
Well, now, what tribe is this, Mike?
I don't know the name of the tribe, but it's a
Is it
group
pygmies?
of
Yeah, I've heard about
pygmies.
that, yeah.
Oh, pygmy. Okay.
And they have a game they play. We would call it tug of war. And all the men line up on one side with the rope and the women on the other, and they start pulling. And there's a pit between them, I guess, with mud or something. And pretty soon somebody's going to get pulled into the mud, and that person has to stand up and act like the opposite gender. So if it's a man that's pulled in, he has to get up and act like a girl. And they start, and everybody laughs because they'll make the girls look real funny. And then the guy, this game goes on until nobody can pull on the rope, and they all end up laughing on the ground. That's how equal they are. So I mean, it is a cultural thing. It's what we choose, what we desire, and it's based a lot upon how we anticipate our need for survival in the future and so forth. And right now, and actually Montague said it again, he says, it's in the best interest of mankind to let women step up to the plate and
Not
assist
only
them.
Montague, but also Alan Watts was saying something about that too.
Well, yeah. We're talking about surviving the coming problems with planet Earth, EAARTH. Yeah, we've talked a little bit about that.
Yeah, McKibben.
We're into a time of global change. It's unprecedented. And we're going to be talking about survival. And to do that, we're going to need men and women working together in small villages and local communities. Just basic things, growing food, nurturing, and just surviving. And that's where we seem to be headed, maybe.
It's interesting because in McKibben's book, he talks about decentralization
Absolutely.
being a core
And progress
factor.
is a myth. We can't. Progress is killing us.
So this reality of urbanization and more people moving into cities, this centralization model being sort of a counterpoint to McKibben's decentralization. I would be unwise to attach a right or wrong to either or. Might there be a both and approach, and looking at connecting rural and urban people through the internet and linking that back to critical thinking and using the internet to share best practices, if you will. So culturally, the pygmy people play this tug of war game, and they go into this sequestered area where they develop as children, seemingly completely informed by nature versus nurture, because the adults say, get out of here, go into the sandbox, and then they naturally develop these roles. Might that be a best practice that can be shared from that tribe globally through the internet, in people going into people's homes,
Sure.
in the countryside and cities?
You
Can
wanna
we all share our best
Get a
practices?
book on cooperative games.
Well, there's also.
They're wonderful. They're incredibly creative and
Yeah.
cooperative
There's an
games. Cooperative
upcoming movement called Living Cities. And this is sort of going beyond green buildings. You take one building and you make it ecologically good. But the Living Cities ones, when they look at a building, the first thing they do is you build a building is, what's going to happen when you tear it down in 50 years? You know, will you just dump everything in the landfill? And then they also look at what's in the neighborhood. Are there gardens? Are there parks? Are there places for
Why
people
would
to
you
bike,
build a building
to
to
walk?
tear it down in 50
No.
years? Why would you do
No,
that?
it's not. If you build a building, when it eventually is no good anymore, will you be able to recycle all the parts of it?
Well, yeah. I mean, can't you transform it into something? You can.
Well,
do
no,
that.
you can, but let's say the building is not, you wanna get rid of, can you reuse all the parts? So it's, like, if you go and buy stuff at the grocery store, what are you gonna do with all the packaging? It's the same concept.
Yeah.
And it's not that buildings are temporary and that you're going, but it's, you think when you build it with things that can be reusable eventually, or will last and not just tear down and send out to the
And
dump.
while you're at it, I've just become somewhat of an expert on universal building construction. Houses should be built so that they're accessible to everybody on an equal basis.
Absolutely.
Okay? And, we've been building our houses according to some European model, with the nuclear family living upstairs, when the families grow older. The house is no longer livable for the family.
It's not up to
And-
date either.
And parents by then they're old, they're getting handicapped, and everybody wants to stay in their home, and they can't stay in their home because the home wasn't built for people with handicaps and so on. But, if we were smart, really smart, and thinking, you would be thinking beyond 50 years, you'd be thinking this house is gonna be around for the next 300
But
years.
yeah, that is part of this
You
whole
know,
thing, and it's a
yeah,
whole
right, I understand
group
that
they,
too.
it's, so you live there for 10 years, but then you would get a kid who's in a wheelchair, or you need a wheelchair, and will
Yeah.
the building still be usable?
And those crutches in the hall, every member of the family is gonna use those crutches, aren't they? At some time or another. They will.
As a person who's been trained in industrial design, product design, definitely the human factors that come into play, designing the built environment and the products within it to fit the 5th percentile female is the language that's used, up to the 95th percentile male, and really that's talking about the difference in body sizes and the difference in features of hands, and when you're developing handles for something, what will the hand feel be? What's the graspable area? What's the height something reaches? So designing for the 5th percentile female and the 95th percentile male is the technical vernacular that's used when discussing human factors and anthropometrics in industrial design. And that makes me start to think about the role that design has in achieving gender equality.
Detroit could use that. My husband was 6'3", so nobody ever asked him to sit in the back seat of a car. So I got used to it. And I think anyone who designed a car should have to spend eternity getting in and out of the back seat. And trying to find the seat belt and just trying to ride with their knees up. But even just getting in and out is ridiculous.
Mhm.
And then if you happen to be dressed up and have a skirt and heels on, it's even worse.
But there are
Certainly.
automobiles that you can get in and out of.
Yes, there are.
That are made for everybody.
Yes.
Not just for the children in the back to be strapped in, that kind of thing.
And I think we're going more towards that, but it hasn't quite got there yet.
Yeah.
Do you think our country of the United States is possibly behind as far as the gender equality versus other European, African, or Asian countries?
I don't think so.
Not than African or Asian, I don't think in most of them. Some European, some yes, some no.
I'd say the Scandinavian countries are
Yeah.
pretty advanced
Yeah.
in terms of gender equality.
The Netherlands.
I think gender equality has to do with everything, as far as like marriage goes, especially marriage, financially, law, everything, like your whole economy, business, you know,
Mhm.
like for instance, you were talking about design, like I was born left-handed, but not even because of culture, but because of society, I had to be right-handed, you know?
The spiral binding.
Yeah.
So who made society say that you have to be right-handed?
And you know,
Well,
there's an actionable,
Who's
there's
for
the
this,
influence we can
you know?
have on each
Is
other.
this gender?
Yeah.
Designers do put things into the built environment,
Yeah.
and all people contribute to society at large and create an effect or create a product or create a general construct, creating businesses. Yeah, what are the roles that we can actively take? Certainly designers are creating objects. If this appears on the left hand and it's in the way of somebody who's left-handed,
Mhm.
you know, there's something a
You can
designer
turn
of
it
the
around.
clipboard
You can turn it around.
turn
No,
it
but
around,
th- but
flip the
then
system.
You can turn
Yeah.
it around, but then you've
Sure.
got to turn the whole paper around too.
Well,
Sure.
But you can
What
do that.
what
with
are
that.
some other tangible ways and other disciplines that have this kind of influence on achieving
Well,
gender equality?
we started looking at that last year's that I taught at the college, and there were some programs. They talked about gender bias in the classroom, how a teacher, male or female, will ask a question, and they'll expect the male to answer the question, and they won't press the female. But even if the male answers it wrong or right, that's okay. They'll ask him another question, and they'll get him to think, you know, about his answer and his response, but they won't do that with the woman.
Mike, are
The
you
woman
telling
is
me?
supposed to have
Mike,
the
are you
answer
telling
in
me
the first place.
the Socratic method is applied unevenly?
Absolutely unevenly, yeah.
Hmm.
And they did the studies and they found out that this is what was happening. So girls were being taught not to think critically.
And not to say anything.
And yeah, right.
To be
And-
quiet.
And that they don't have to have the answers. They could just be quiet and look pretty or something, I don't know, but.
Or
It's
not
upsetting.
to look like you're smarter than the boys.
Right, and if they did, they could be in trouble. Although I had some professors in college who said if the girl sits in the front row, she's gonna get an A. And he would just totally destroy that. If you sit in the back row, you're not gonna make it, but I sit back there and raise hands and question them all the time. I got an A, he was just,
Flip the system.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, flip, you have to work it, yeah.
So design influencing through objects in the built environment, education influencing through influencing gender equality
Right
through
there in the classroom.
In the classroom, yes.
Yeah.
Giving equal platforms
Yeah.
and equal imbuing of confidence is what I see as a huge leveraging point for the education sector, is building confidence in everyone.
I think that this is something that needs to continue to be talked about and be talked about in different ways.
Mhm.
Just like racism and other social issues in the world that always change over time and always seem to occur, no matter, even when we think that we won over the issue. I mean, still to this day, for example, there's a lot of racism, and those are things that should always be taught in school and should never be put aside. And the same with gender. And I think what's happened from the time it started, the feminism movement, to now, between that time, people just kind of gave up on it and just kind of looked at it like it has a bad rep and shouldn't be talked about. But like I said, it should always be studied, and education always changes in this, in every field, and yeah, to continue on with it.
I appreciate that, because I was holding back from saying anything about the racism factor in society today, which is just as prevalent as in history, because I feel that the sex issue or the gender issue of equality needs to be put out in front of everybody, as well as the race issue has been put out in the past. I think it is yet out there, and I think it needs to yet be addressed and dealt with daily, if not hourly.
Mhm.
But it's important to bring out things that have not yet been brought forth,
Yeah.
which is what we've all been talking about
A
this
good
evening.
historical footnote on the racism, sexism thing is, when they wrote the Pledge of Allegiance, the man that wrote it finished it off with liberty, equality, and justice for all. And he took the pledge to the state superintendent in Boston in 1889. And he says, no, we can't have the word equality in there. And he said, well, why not? He said, well, women and blacks are not equal. So they took the word equality out and left liberty and justice in.
Not equal to what?
To each
White
other,
men.
to whatever, to everybody else.
White men.
There wasn't liberty for women or blacks. So it was taken out. And, you know, I think the day is coming when we can put equality back into the pledge. You know, liberty, equality, and justice. And these are the three cornerstone pinnacles of American justice and American freedom and so forth.
Is using the word issue when dealing with race and gender, assigning a negative attribute to it. Gender issue, race issue. When a young person hears this, there's an issue. Oh, there's something wrong. There's something wrong. How does that affect their development and their perception?
You mean how does it affect their the development? Because that's a reality factor, and I think reality needs to be dealt with by children in order for them to grow in a realistic manner.
Sure. And I think that goes back to nature nurture too. And we teach our children reality.
Right, but do we say anything to them about the equality of gender when we talk to them about?
It starts in the
Certainly.
home.
I think the
This starts-
vernacular is very important as we're approaching this topic. We need to be deliberate and we need to be very, very cautious about how we build strength and confidence in the next generation.
Yeah,
I-
because gender biases are strapped on you from day one. You know, like when you're a baby, you wear the pink pajama,
Yeah.
and then the boy wears the blue pajama.
Yeah, oh, there it is.
Yeah.
It used to be different.
My
Yeah.
sister.
I don't know if you know now, but
Oh, it used to be different?
it used to be different. It used to be where the boy would wear the pink.
When was this?
Oh, this is back in the early 1900s or the
No.
late
cute.
late.
I don't
Some
think
mothers
so.
dress their sons
Oh.
in girls'
Yeah.
clothing.
Well, yeah, I
Up
have
to
a
a
picture of
certain
my
age.
great-grandfather who was born in 1853.
Well, they used to
and
put
he's
boys
got
in
a
dresses and stuff.
Yeah, they were in dress, and then
Yeah.
they would
They
wear,
do it
when they
then.
were like 6, they would start wearing short pants. And then later they would
Yeah.
wear long
I've
pants.
seen a lot of
right.
old
Uncle
photos.
But
Carl,
those
sure.
were, those were
Yeah.
rich, those were rich boys.
Rich boys
Yeah.
wore skirts.
Right.
And linking it back to Emma Watson's representation of he for she as a Goodwill ambassador to the UN, it's really about men and women coming together, boys and girls coming together for equality, and using language as a very deliberate tool to achieve this as we're implementing these global objectives to achieve the betterment of all life on Earth. I wonder if the conversation can also become geared toward how to best position this this opportunity to the youngest members of our community. Certainly, once a certain age is reached, the importance of looking at history is paramount in achieving a just and verdant world moving forward. I wonder if taking an active role in creating this equality with our youngest people has a different approach. It has a different implementation plan per age group.
I think so.
Sure,
I think so.
and it starts pretty young.
And I think by Mike, when you say it starts in the home, I think it also starts with us, with the way we relate to our community, even if we don't have kids. You know, the the way we
Well.
talk to kids and treat them, and
Mhm.
if we're in a group in a classroom where we see kids are, there's part of it is a systematic and corporate culture, but it's also our doing what we can to change the culture individually.
Mhm.
Okay.
Well, with all these factors that are brought forth by all of us, I think that being the two of you are actually our new commentators, I have to stand in. Well,
I agree too.
freedom
This
to
has
stand.
been a
Thank
very
you,
good
and
night.
thank you so much.
Oh,
Thank you so much.
With such
For
graciousness.
leading.
Great
Thank you. Well, he did
discussion.
more of the talking, so.
Well,
Thank you.
yeah.
I
You
think
said you
both
did
of
a
you
lot of the
settled
research.
according to the situation, and I think you are, very dynamic and versatile on all different points, and I commend you for that.
Is there a?
We appreciate the invite.
Is there a plan for, next week as far as the
Next
topic?
week.
more
We
of
have
this?
like things that we wrote down, but I know we have to talk to all of you. If whether I don't know if you want to meet sometime at a coffee shop or something and talk about it, but we have a few things we jotted down. Haven't really decided.
The
anything.
next one should be Thursday, November 6th.
Oh, okay. So
And
just
between-
have- just
Oh,
have that.
Between now and then,
No,
this is
the
where,
no.
fifth, the
Yeah.
fifth is the elections.
Okay.
this is where we,
Yeah,
have.
but that's gonna
So
be a
you
lot
also
of
filming
talking
us
about that,
planning
I
the
would
next
think.
meeting
No,
too?
no, between now and then is, the
Is
fact
it-
that we have been using the Mayan Buzz Cafe
Yes.
as a meeting place.
Awesome place.
That's one of the
We should all
main
go.
meeting places that we meet.
That's a great place to meet.
They've been with
Occupy
us
Mayan Buzz.
for pretty close to a year now. Now, we also meet at Big B Coffee Place, which is on Fuller and Michigan at the corner. But they close at 9. Unfortunate, but they still are very open and great for us to meet. So, Mayan Buzz and/or
My only
The,
problem with
Big B-
meeting in a coffee shop is I'm going through a period of very hard finances, so I can't afford going to coffee.
we'll see if something can happen with that. I'm not sure how or what, but something
We can switch it
can
up.
always develop.
We can go to like someone's house or
Yeah.
meet here. Yeah.
Go to
Yeah.
my house, ain't there?
Anyway,
You have a nice
as long
house,
as,
too.
as long as
We
it's
love
being
your
filmed,
house.
as long as
Yeah.
this is being filmed, I want people
It's
to
like
know
it's
that
mid-century modern.
we're being supported by the Mayan Buzz Cafe at 208 not Cherry, but Granville, at the corner of Cherry, Southwest. Also by Big B Coffee, which is at the corner of Michigan and Fuller, Michigan and Fuller, Northeast. And of course, the one and only Papa John's.
And if our viewing audience has topics they'd like to suggest, they could call the
Yes.
IGE office,
Or
ask
email
for
us.
Chester, whatever.
Or email us on Facebook. I'm Chester Lowe
Mhm.
at hotmail.com or Chester A. Lowe in Facebook.
Spelled.
LOWE is the last
Very
name.
good, okay.
Or could they go to the IGE Facebook's page also?
Certainly.
Exactly.
We'd love feedback.
So this has been a great program, and we thank you all for watching. Join us next time as we dive deep into topics as a group. This circle of chairs representing different points of view, coming together and centering around new and fresh topics that are relevant locally and globally. This is John Longchamp signing off.
And Renee Karachi as well.
Thanks a lot.
Have a good night.